Welcome to driver training. In today's video, we're going to show you a briefing for the cockpit drill and controls lesson for the ADI Part 3 or ADI Standards. Now, although at the moment this isn't actually a part of the ADI Part 3 as of the middle of 2023, it doesn't mean that at some point the DVSA won't reintroduce it and allow it on the Part 3s. But more importantly, once you pass your Part 3 and you're going to start teaching learners, then if you're not teaching your learners to do this properly, you're setting them up to fail, and that's not what we want. The other thing to bear in mind when you're doing a briefing for cockpit drill and controls, it's not just the case of rattling through, this is a door, we open it, this is a seat belt, we put it on. You've still got to look for any potential faults that the pupil is doing. Then you have to not only identify it, you have to analyze it, tell them why it's wrong, what the potential outcome is, and then help them to put that right. So now that we've set the foundation for our lesson and we understand what needs doing, what we're going to do then is look at the briefing for the cockpit drill and controls. So when we open our briefing folder, we can see that on the left-hand side, that gives you the lesson outline, and you need to use this every time you do a lesson. This will count not only for your ADI Part 3 and standards check, but just for your general lessons as well. On the right-hand side, we've got the pictures. Now, the learners can look at those because we know that a picture paints 1,000 words. So by using the same pictures, you both understand what you're talking about. So let's go through it section by section. First of all, you need to recap or find out what experience the person has. So did you do this in the last lesson? Even if they're going for test, you can still look at what they're doing, because how many times does your learner get ready to drive off and they haven't set up their mirrors at that point? Or they start to drive and suddenly the seatbelt warning light goes off. So you can always look at this. Now, because you may not have done this before, it could be their first time in the car, do they have any experience? We had one pupil who got in, her family didn't drive at all. She was going to be the first one to learn to drive. So she spent most of her time on buses. When she got lifts with friends, 9 times out of 10, she was in the back seat. So you really couldn't even say to her, so as a passenger in the front seat, you may have had experience, because she couldn't relate to it too well. So it was a completely blank slate that you had to start teaching from. Whereas you can get someone who's perhaps been out for lessons with mum or dad, been driving in a field. They know the controls and what they are, but they don't know how to set them up properly. So you need to find out what level of experience they have before you start teaching, because this will set the level that you teach at, whether it be fully guided, prompted, or by means of questions. That then brings us to the goals. So by the end of today's lesson, you'll be able to enter the car safely, to be able to seat yourself in the proper position, be able to get the maximum view from your mirrors and understand the difference between flat glass and convex glass, and understand how using the Dutch reach method to open the door is the safest way of opening the door whilst keeping it under control. Now, if you're not sure what the Dutch reach method is, we're going to go through that in a minute. But by setting a goal, the learner at the end of the lesson is able to assess for themselves that learning has taken place. They've worked on something, they understand something. So it's really important to set goals at the start of the lesson. So that brings us on to our next section then, how to do it. So the first thing we always go through with a briefing on the cockpit drill and controls is mention about the precautions on entering the vehicle. Generally, we tell people that it is better and it is safer to enter from the rear of the vehicle. Now, the reason for this is purely down to safety, because when they enter from the rear of the vehicle, it makes it easier to get in. You don't have to open the door so wide. You can slide in and you're going with the flow of traffic. Very often when people come from the front, they open the door really wide, which means they're standing at the side of it and often on or over the white line, and then they get in. Whereas coming from the back, the door's under control, it's not open so wide, therefore it's safer. So the next part then is, are the doors fully closed? So again, how would your pupil know if the door wasn't closed properly? You could ask them, do they know? Well, then you could mention, is the interior light on? You could mention about the sound the door makes. It's not a click, it's a clunk. Or it's not a click, it's a thud. Is there a beeping noise when you start to drive? When you look at the dashboard, is there a warning light on? If any of these are happening, then as the driver, it's your legal responsibility for the safety of your passengers. Now here, one of the mistakes people make as trainees is to tell me to look in the mirror and see if the side of the door is disjointed, if the rubber isn't running flat along where the glass is. Now the trouble with this is, if you look at the picture on the right, we're talking about the first thing, the doors. And they're asking me to look in the mirrors, which is kind of the last thing. The one thing that we haven't done at this point is adjust the mirrors. So if my side mirror, my driver's side door mirror, is pointing at the instructor and I can't see a thing, I'm still going to say, yes, it looks fine, because I've never driven before, I've never done the cockpit drill before, and I don't know what I should be looking at. So you can always put a picture on your phone or your tablet. Ask them to move their head around so that they can see the door. You can use the mirror, but don't just glance in it. Literally, you have to move around to see that view. But just be aware they haven't adjusted the mirror at this point, so they won't really be able to see anything through it. Also, from a fault identification perspective, make sure they don't open the door without checking their blind spot if they do need to close it properly. Don't just let them practice opening and closing the door without looking over the right shoulder to make sure it's safe, because as we said, it's no good saying to them, check that right mirror, is it safe to open it? They don't know because they haven't learned the perspective of that mirror yet. And secondly, the mirror isn't set up for them yet. So again, make sure they don't open that door without checking the blind spot first. So that brings us on to the Dutch reach method of opening the door. When we open the door normally, we put the hand that is closest to the door on the handle, and then naturally your elbow rests against the door and you kind of push it open. Now, there's two problems with this. First of all, if it's a windy day, the wind can take the door and blow it open before you've had a chance really to gain control of it. And secondly, as you open it, you're still facing forwards. What the Dutch reach method does is helps you to control the door, and it helps you to look for any vehicles coming from behind. So what it means is we take the hand that is furthest from the door, we reach across, and with the hand that is closest, we use that on the door grip to actually control the door opening so it can't fly open. But also what it does is it makes you start to twist so that you're actually looking backwards over your shoulder as you open the door, which therefore means it's a safer method of opening the door because you're more likely to spot any cyclists, any e-bikes or e-scooters. And with the rise of things like e-bikes and e-scooters, you won't even hear them coming up at the side of you. So it becomes more and more important to make sure it is clear before you open your door. And this applies to whether we're the driver or the passenger. And that's why the highway code now under Rule 239 states you must ensure you don't hit anyone when you open your door. Check for cyclists and other traffic by looking all around and using your mirrors. But now it states when you're able to do so, open the door using your hand on the opposite side to the door that you're opening. So if you use your left hand to open a door on a right-hand side, this will make you turn your head to look over your shoulder. You are then more likely to avoid causing injury to cyclists or motorcyclists passing you on the road or to people on the pavement. So again, do we encourage our pupils to even use this as a passenger? The reason they've brought this in is that statistics show every year over 500 people across England, Wales and Scotland are injured because someone opens a car door in their path. And these are just the injuries that are reported to the police. Many more go unreported. So you can see that's just the door so far. Rather than saying this opens, this closes, and that's it, we're making them understand it more. And on the first lesson, you need to be able to help them to understand these things. So then we go on to the handbrake. Now, generally, if you've got an older pull-up handbrake, you would make sure that this was the first thing you did, because as the extra weight was put into the car, if the handbrake wasn't on and you were on a bit of a hill, the more weight that got in the car, the more likely it was to just start rolling. So it's always a good idea if you've got the older type handbrakes to do this. If you've got electronic handbrakes, generally you don't need to, because it automatically, in most cases, just applies itself and is already on. The myth with handbrakes is you have to press the button in and not pull it up on the ratchet, or else it wears the metal out, which is just rubbish. I've never heard such a big a load of rubbish. When was the last time you heard of somebody's handbrake wearing out? The companies would be sued. I think it was about 2004, 2005. There was an email from the DVSA to state that because of the advancement in the metal that was used and technology, that this was no longer going to be marked even as a fault by examiners if your pupil pulled it up on the ratchet. And one of the things that pupils do, because they lift it up with just the button, it means they tend to drop it down one or even two notches. And so we had a trainee a couple of weeks ago who had been taught that when you get a pupil to do this, you get them to pull it up, let the button out, then pull it up one more notch. And the reason for that was the handbrake always dropped down before they released the button. But that's what they were telling every pupil. Why? Just pull it up on the ratchet till you feel resistance, and that's it. Because the trouble with doing what that other method was, if I do pull it up correctly and it's at the top of the travel, and then I've still got to pull it up another notch on top of that, I'm going to stretch the cable, I'm going to risk snapping things and breaking things. Just simply pull it up on the ratchet until you feel resistance, and that's it. From a fault perspective point of view again, is there a warning light on the dashboard to say they haven't released it properly? If they don't release it properly, can they keep the button in until they hear that thud when the handbrake hits the bottom to know that it's off properly? You've got to look for these things as you get them to practice taking the handbrake off and then pulling it back up again. So that now brings us to the seat. The seat's got 4 functions: up and down, forward and back, the rake of the seat, and the head restraint. So again, the first thing we need to do is the up and down. The reason for that is you'll notice probably in your car, if you move that seat up and down, it also goes forward and or back at the same time. So if you adjust the forward and back part first and then do the up and down, it actually moves the seat out of position. So again, with the height of the seat, are they too high? Is their head too close to the roof? So they're going to hit it and knock themselves out. Are they too low so that they can't really see over the dashboard? They're using that laid back style of driving. The forward and back, again, showing them how to use it to hold on to the wheel with one hand while they use the other hand on the bar. So they've got some leverage to move forwards and back. What tends to happen if you're facing uphill is they pull the bar up and then the seat goes flying backwards. So it's always good to get them to hang on to the steering wheel at the same time. The rake of the seat, the back part, again, is it just high enough that they're in a nice upright position to get to the wheel? Remember, the arms just want to have a gentle bend in them, and then the headrest just needs to be so the top of the ear is level with the middle of the head restraint. So again, you can get them to put their head against the head restraint and just run their hand from the top of their ear back to the head restraint, hold it while they turn around and have a look, and it should be roughly in the middle of that head restraint. So that's door, handbrake, seat, and that now brings us to the adjustment of the steering wheel. Most cars today have adjustable steering wheels. So there's a lever or a button on the left underneath the steering wheel, and the steering wheel actually moves up and down and in and out. Now again, it's good just to get to know your car to see what it actually does, and that helps us in 2 aspects. First is our position of our arms for steering, and second is our visibility of the road ahead and the instruments in front of us. Now on this one, the controls are digital, but if you've got the analog style with the needles, you need to ask your pupils, can you see the 0 on the left? And can you see all the numbers up to 70? Can you also see the fuel gauge? Because sometimes they set the wheel up that if you said to them, can you see the speedo? They'll say yes, but they can only see the numbers 40 upwards. So you need to know for definite what they actually can see. But then, like with everything for the part 3, for the standards check, you have to analyse it. Well, if you can't see below 30, Chris, if we're in a 20 zone and you can't see where the 20 is, the risk is you're going to be caught speeding. With the fuel gauge on the right, you can't see anything below the halfway point. So therefore, as we're driving around, you can't see when this car is about to go on to empty. And you know, to break down, because you're out of fuel, one, it can cause a major inconvenience to you and others, especially if you're on a busy road or a dual carriageway. But then you've got to wait for somebody to bring the fuel out and get you going again. So it's much easier to make sure that the steering wheel is adjusted so we can see these things clearly. Then we want to have the steering in such a position that we've got a slight bend in our arms, because we need to be able to turn the wheel and use the indicators, as well as possibly, if you're in a manual, changing the gears. So we can't have that death grip on the wheel, and we don't want our arms stretched out fully, because when we turn the wheel, we're not going to be able to keep control of it. We're going to get to a certain point, then our arms will start to cross, and it means we don't have full control of the steering. So that now brings us to putting on our seatbelt. When we reach for the seatbelt, we use the hand opposite to the seatbelt to pull it across. That way we're making sure that the belt is flat and it's not twisted. The reason we want to make sure that it's not twisted is that if it is twisted, it takes longer to react. And then when it does react, if there's a twist in it, it means it's going to dig into your chest and leave a huge bruise on your chest bone. And as the pupil is doing that, you need to be watching them to see, are they doing it correctly, or are there any faults? So the final part of our cockpit drill then is mirrors. Now we have two main types of mirrors. Firstly, it's the interior mirror, which is made of flat glass, which gives the most accurate picture of what's going on behind us. And then you have the two side mirrors. They're made from convex glass, so they give a wider field of vision, but therefore make things look smaller and further away than they actually are. Which is why when we use the mirrors, we want to use them in pairs, center and left, or center and right. Now, the way we adjust them is with our center mirror, we use our left hand on the corner of the mirror casing. What we don't want to do is use our right hand. The reason for this is, as our right hand comes across, you'll notice that your right shoulder comes off the chair. And then when you sit back again, the vision isn't the same as it was while you were looking in it. So by using the left hand, it means our shoulder never leaves the chair. So we're getting an accurate vision of what's behind us. We also want to put our hands on the corner of the plastic part and not the glass, so we don't get any thumbprints or palm prints on the glass, which again would obscure our vision. Or overnight, because of the thumbprint or palm print, it would really be distracting as the light reflected off it. So the way we want to adjust the center mirror is to think of it like a picture in a picture frame. We want the top of the back window in line with the top of the mirror, the bottom of the back window in line with the bottom, And just in that final quarter of the mirror, you just want to see the edge of your head restraint. For the side mirrors, what we don't want to tell our pupils is it needs to be half ground, half sky, because that's a really bad way of setting up your mirrors. Depends on where you are as to what the view is behind you. But generally, a better way of doing it is to say we want to get it so that the front door handle is for the driver's side mirror in the bottom left-hand corner, and for the passenger mirror, we want the front handle in the bottom right-hand corner. Then, if they're parked with trees behind them, factories behind them, a garage behind them, another car parked behind them, or a lorry, they're going to be able to set their mirrors up properly, and then you know exactly what the view is. But now, as they do this, you need to be watching them and watching what they're doing. Here, the instructor is looking in the mirrors himself. He's not watching the pupil, but look at the pupil. She's moving her neck around to actually see into those mirrors. She shouldn't be. You should be able to just turn, have a quick glance, not physically have to move around in the seat to be able to see what's in those mirrors. The final part, if your mirror has it, is the anti-dazzle button at the bottom. Once they've set the mirror up, you can say, is it a daytime view or nighttime view? Because if the anti-dazzle is on, of course, they're going to get a sort of darker image. And then you can explain that what this does is if there's a vehicle behind with bright headlights or high headlights and the light is shining in our eyes, we can move this switch. What that does, it just helps us to still see behind, but like in a ghostly outline way. It just means they're not going to blind us as we're traveling on a dark road. Once the vehicle has turned off, then you can flick that button back and it gives you your mirror back. So that's our quick guide to the cockpit drill, along with possible faults and analysis. In our next video, we'll go through the controls for you to give you a better idea of how to do that. So we hope this video has helped you. Remember, the link for the briefing folder is in the description below. Please feel free to leave us a comment, let us know what you think. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel. My name's Chris from Driver Training Limited. Remember, drive safely, teach well, and we'll see you all again in our next video.